I don't know why so many humans correlate wine with mysticism. Sure, it looks like blood, but why is this particular bodily fluid so special? We don't romanticize phlegm or bile. I'm author Gwen Alyce Clayton, and today we're going to talk about what makes old vine zinfandel so freaking magical. My first introduction to the word zinfandel was back in the 1980s when white zinfandel was all the rage. It was pink and sweet and really light-bodied. It wasn't until I was in my 20s when I had a roommate who was a huge fan of the dark, murky red wine. And it wasn't long before zinfandel was my signature drink. In the early 2000s, I became friends with a winemaker family that lived in Amador County, California, which is about 40 miles northeast of Sacramento, where my home was. My husband at the time, he and I decided that we loved the area so much that we wanted to buy a home up there. So we finally found a place we could afford up in this tiny little hamlet called Fiddletown. Kid you not, that is the name of the town. And it was this beautiful area. There were tons of wineries, and everyone we talked to had a ghost story to tell. Okay, maybe not everyone, but after 13 years of living in Amador County, I have quite a collection of stories about wine, ghosts, and land use. Also, during that time, I had a day job as an administrative assistant in the Amador County Planning Department. I would frequently take meeting minutes and notes for the Planning Commission and code enforcement hearings. One time I asked the code enforcement officer, hey, can somebody file a complaint for a building being haunted? Isn't that a nuisance or a public safety hazard? She just laughed at me and said, no, Gwen, you can't file a complaint against a ghost. When I asked the planning director the same question, she just gave me this look like I was the biggest idiot on earth, which, okay, so that's not a big stretch, but nonetheless, the answer wasn't implicit. No, Gwen, you cannot file a code enforcement claim against a ghost. Everybody thinks Napa is where all of California's wine comes from, but I beg to differ. I think the best wine comes from Amador County. We have a saying over there that says, Napa sells auto parts, Amador sells wine. And even though Lodi, which is in San Joaquin County, claims to be the Zinfandel capital of the world, I am telling you right now, I would bet my reputation on this, that it is Amador County that has the best Zinfandel in the whole world. I'm not exaggerating. The problem with Zinfandel, though, is that it can be a little too diverse. It can be sweet and jammy and really fruit forward, or it can be dry and spicy, almost like a salsa. What I like, my personal favorite, is a nice, dry, full-bodied Zinfandel that's not too tannic and not too vinegary. I don't want to dry my throat out. I cannot find a decent Zinfandel here in Indiana. Zinfandel grapes don't grow here because our freezes are too hard. So we have to go with varietals that will grow here in our inclement weather. Zinfandel grapes like a really dry, hot, long summer. And our summers just aren't that long. I don't know when they first start growing grapes, but I know that they have crush in September. By like the first or second week of September, crush is done. And in California, they're still going well into Halloween time. One of the problems with Indiana wine is that Hoosiers really love their sweets. They have a huge sweet tooth. So Indiana wines tend to be very sweet, very light-bodied. I can buy California wines at the liquor store. My favorite as of late is this Lapis Lazuli 2018 Zin. It's cute. It's even got a little crescent moon. You see that? A crescent moon on the cork. Isn't that cute? And then it's got this really funky, mystical thing on the back, design on the back. But that's not why I like this. I like this because this is the closest I can get to a Gwen approved Zinfandel wine. It's full-bodied, it's dry, and it's smooth. Everything else here in Indiana tastes either like grandma's secret fermented grape jelly or grandpa's secret fermented grape vinegar. This one is just right, but this was made in King City, California. I don't even know where that is, but they use North Coast grapes. So it is dark, it is smooth, it is bold, and it is spicy. And I like it. I don't know where that. I have my phone upside down today, so everything's different. So the nice thing about Amador County is that it's in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. So it's just the right temperature. It's for Zinfandel grapes. That they're also famous for Barbera and Syrah grapes. It's right on par with the I think latitudinally, it's right on par with the Rhone region of France, and then Italy as well. Speaking of Italy, we have a controversy about the Zinfandel grape, which I mentioned is my favorite. There is a huge controversy over whether it is an Italian grape or a Croatian grape. And it's sold as an Italian varietal, but the Croatians will argue with that. Now, speaking for me personally, I don't really care, but the controversy gave me an idea. In my Rivervine trilogy, which is the books that I write, and I have them here, the first one is Fermata Cellars. That's the name of the haunted winery. And Zinfandel's Grimoire. Zinfandel is the name of the ghost. So in my books, what I came up with is that it is actually a California grape. It is native to California. Kid you not, I worked that out, did the math. I made it a California grape. You read the books and you'll know how I did it. The name Zinfandel was inspired by the time that I spent living in Fiddletown, California. The town was divided in half by this really deep ditch, a big gully that separated the town. So the east side of town was all of the Europeans, and the west side of town was Chinatown. And today there are 3 buildings that still remain intact of that Chinatown. The first one is the Chukey Pharmacy, which was made into a museum, I think in 1967. And it's open April through October on Saturdays. Fascinating place to visit. I highly recommend going there if you're into Chinese American history. And then across the street, you can see, I don't think you can go in, but you can see the Chinese General Store and the Chinese Gambling Hall. And those buildings are all that remain of Fiddletown's Chinatown from the 19th century. What makes this place so special with the Chinese is, well, a lot of things. It's the last remnant of an intact Old West Chinatown. There's one Chinese American buried, I almost said living, buried in the Fiddletown Cemetery. His name is Jimmy Chow. Tong Fon Yu was his name at birth, and he was known to the townsfolk as Jimmy Chow. And he is the only Chinese American buried in the Fiddletown Cemetery. Fun trivia there. Fiddletown used to have its own Chinese cemetery, but the bones were dug up and sent back to China. That was part of their custom, was to be buried in the land you were born in. That's why Jimmy Chow was born in the United States, so he was buried in the United States. He was born in October of 1885. He lived to the ripe old age of 80, died in 1965. But his family moved back to China in the late 1890s. There was this whole Chinese must go movement. 1882 had the Chinese Exclusion Act, and by the 1890s, late 1880s, all of the Chinese people who could go back to China, well, not all of them, many of the people, of the Chinese people who could go back to China did. Some found work in laundries and restaurants. That's why you always hear about Chinese laundries and Chinese restaurants and other parts of the agricultural industry, but they were actually very good at mining. So good that the European Americans became jealous of them and started this whole Chinese exclusion policy, which became codified. But Jimmy Chow was too young to make the hazardous journey, the perilous journey back to China, so he was adopted by Chu Qi, who was the pharmacist at the time, and he became the, I don't know why Chu Qi stayed. You know, I don't remember the whole story. It's been so long since I've lived in Fiddletown. Some of the Chinese immigrants remained, but most of them moved back because it was just too hard for them to be accepted in American society. But Chu Qi stayed, and Chu Qi's wife stayed, and Jimmy Chow stayed. And some other people stayed, but I only know about Jimmy. Anyhow, I'm getting way off track. This has nothing to do with wine, except for this is all Amador County, and Amador County wine, and Amador County ghosts. So my second book, Zinfandel's Grimoire, is dedicated to Jimmy Chow. He is my favorite ghost of Amador County, and I frequently visited his grave when I lived there. I feel horrible because I was just back there a few weeks ago, and I totally spaced out on going to his gravesite. But I did stop by Fiddletown and grab some footage. Also stopped by Dry Town Cellars. Dry Town Cellars is special in the Zinfandel, or the Rivervine trilogy. I've had way too much wine already today, and it's only 3 o'clock. Dry Town is another tiny little hamlet in Amador County, but Dry Town Cellars Vineyard, their main vineyard is on a south-facing slope. So when I wrote the Zinfandel, or the Rivervine trilogy, I had the Fermata Cellars Vineyard on a south-facing slope. So it was Dry Town Cellars that I studied very closely when I was writing my book. Now, what else did I want to tell you about? There's more than that. Anyhow, I love Dry Town Cellars Zinfandel. It is excellent. Alan Kreitzer, who's the winemaker. Cheers. Here's to you. Excellent wine. I need a moment of silence. So what does make Old Vine Zinfandel so freaking magical? I'll tell you what. There's something in the spirit of the grape, of the wine itself, that leads the seeker onto a path that leads them to their higher purpose. That's what I think, at least. Now, of course, I could totally be full of shit, but what do I care? Just enjoy what you drink and be mindful while you're drinking it. That's what I have to say. That is the magic. Next week, we'll talk more. I'll see you next Tuesday.